Lone Rider here, and I wanted to point out that on the subject of gun control, pretty much everything you know is probably wrong, as Weird Al just sang. Um, Basically, the debate has been steered, if you can call it a debate, and I'm not sure you really can, has been steered by people who don't really know all that much about what they're talking about, either in terms of the actual firearms themselves or in terms of existing gun laws and regulations. Now, some of these people might be sincere, and some of these people might actually have a point. But the fact is, they're wrong. And so, a lot of the things that you're hearing in the media right now, virtually every description of the firearms involved is incorrect. Virtually every description of what type of guns you can and can't buy legally is incorrect. Every description of the frequency with which they're used in crimes is incorrect, etc. So let's start with a couple of the main things that you know are wrong. First one, assault rifles, as far as civilian ownership, aren't really a thing. An assault rifle is a weapon such as the M4 or the M16, which are issued to the military. They're capable of firing on fully automatic or more than one round for each pull of the trigger. So fully automatic or in some cases multiple round bursts. But they're not semi-automatic, only rifles. However, that's how they're being described. And conversely, semi-automatic only rifles are being described as military-style assault rifles. They're not. Now, what they might be, depending upon where you live, is assault weapons, because that's a politically created term which was concocted in the 1990s by gun control advocates precisely because assault rifle was already taken and refers to an actual thing. So, the downside, sorry, assault rifles aren't generally legal for people to own, even with a gun license. They're essentially, they're not entirely prohibited, but they're, for all intents and purposes, it's illegal for you to own one if you're a regular citizen, even if you have a gun license. So that's legally there's a difference, and of course the takeaway is there's a physical difference too. There's a difference in reality between an assault rifle and a regular semi-automatic civilian rifle or modern sporting rifle. So the downside is, sorry, assault rifles aren't a thing. The upside is you don't have to worry about somebody just walking into Walmart and buying one, because they can't. And they haven't been able to do so for a long time. The first of the laws that restricted this was actually the 1934 National Firearms Act. So this really hasn't been a thing for over half a century. Moving on. Assault rifles, which of course aren't really a thing, but nevertheless, are heavily used in crimes and are the weapon of choice for criminals. Oh my God! Actually, no. Believe it or not, rifles of any sort are seldom used in violent crime. In fact, they represent an incredibly small subset of violent crime. So why does that seem to be the focus now? I don't know. Moving on. We need gun control, and in particular, a prohibition on assault rifles, which of course, again, aren't a thing, but whatever. They're talking about semi-automatic rifles. They just don't understand what they are or how that relates to their legality. I mean, if they were talking about assault rifles, they're already heavily restricted, so that's nothing to worry about. But they're talking about assault rifles, but they are proposing bans on semi-automatic rifles. So I don't either they don't know what they're talking about, or they're misinformed, or they're being disingenuous, whatever. But the common refrain is that we need to ban these assault rifles, which are already essentially banned, because there's no other way to prevent people from using them in crimes. There's nothing we can do. There's nothing that could have prevented, for example, this shooting in Florida. So we just have to take away everybody's guns and restrict everybody's access to these things, because there was no way to prevent this. Actually, there was. The police were aware of this individual that did the shooting. I'm not going to mention his name. No need to give him any fame or glory. this mass murdering fiend that killed all these innocent people. There's plenty that could have been done to stop him, starting with enforcing existing laws against actual criminal infractions. This is a person that came to the attention of the local police on numerous occasions. The facts still aren't in, so we don't actually know how many times the police came to his house. One article I read said 19 times. Another one said 39 times. And I was told by a family member who read another account that the police came to his house 40-something times. We still don't know how many times the police came to his house, but it was more than a few. This was a person who was known to the police as a problem and as a dangerous individual. This is also a person who was known to the federal authorities. He had posted threats online and made statements threatening violence, in particular, even going so far as to state that he intended to be a school shooter. And yet the FBI was tipped off about this, and they did nothing. They didn't. Now, I'm not saying the FBI didn't do anything on purpose. Obviously, like the rest of us, they would have much rather prevented this tragedy. But for whatever reason, they didn't do anything. Either it fell through the cracks, they were, maybe they just have too many tips to investigate. I don't know. But the point is, it wasn't like we didn't know who this guy was. So the argument that, well, you have to ban these kind of guns because there's no way to know who's going to do a crime like this. There's no other thing we can do except just prohibit everybody from having them because there's nothing else no, there's plenty of things you could do. You could just enforce the law against the people that are potentially dangerous. And this is a guy who, some of the stuff he did might have just been worrisome or make you scratch your head or make you look at him like, what the hell's wrong with you, man? But a lot of the stuff that he did actually was illegal. Posting threats is illegal. Threatening people, brandishing weapons. These are all things that are against the law and for which he could have been, the police could have interceded. And if he had some kind of a violent arrest or conviction even on his record, that would be something that would have, prevented him from either getting a gun or maintaining a hold of the guns that he did have. And of course, if he's in jail, he doesn't have access to guns either. So, to say, well, there's nothing we could have done, so we just have to ban the guns. There's plenty of things you could have done and that weren't done. And I'm not trying to diss the police here, but the point is, this is a case where there were a lot of things they could have done, and for whatever reason, and we don't know yet why, but they didn't. So, before we make the leap to there was nothing that could have been done, so let's just ban guns and hope that we inadvertently deter some shootings, let's talk about what actually went wrong in this case and how to fix that. Right? And then, lastly, of course, is that gun control laws, including the various measures that are being considered, would prevent these type of crimes. We had a ban on semi-automatic rifles, which were, of course, referred to misleadingly as assault weapons, in the 1990s. We had that for 10 years. And over those 10 years, it was studied and people looked at it and they analyzed it. And pretty much everybody has come to the conclusion, even many of the gun control advocates, those who've bothered to look at the facts, that it had absolutely no effect on the violent crime rate one way or the other. So to say, well, if you were to ban, let's say, AR-15 rifles, which is the current discussion topic among many people, first of all, that would be a logistical nightmare because there's millions of them in circulation in private hands. Secondly, that's just one type of semi-automatic rifle. There are many other types. And we do know that they tried banning a wide variety of semi-automatic firearms in the 1990s, again under the Clinton-era assault weapons ban, so-called. And that had absolutely no effect on the crime rate one way or the other. So it's kind of, disingenuous at best, I guess, to argue that. And then lastly, of course, wait a minute. If there are all of these AR-15s in private hands, how come we're not all dead? How come there hasn't been a humongously AR-15 crime wave? Because the truth is that the vast majority of people in this country who own guns don't hurt anybody with them. So why should you care whether or not they own them? Why should that be the focal point of policy? Why should you be trying to take them away or restrict them? If, I mean, let's say for the sake of argument that there's a million AR-15s in private hands. There's way more than that, but let's say a million. How come we haven't had a million violent shootings? A million criminal shootings involving AR-15s? Because the vast majority of people who own them aren't crazy people, are criminals. So, I mean, the very fact that we're all still breathing is kind of proof that, as the FBI statistics bear out, these type of things aren't used all that much in crimes. Actually, you're more likely to be stabbed to death than you are to be shot with a rifle of any kind, let alone an AR-15 in particular. So, like I said,